Right. Yesterday, we really focused on what the population believes. We were looking at the main ideologies and things like that. Today, we're trying to focus on who the population actually is. So, what we're going to do is we are going to break down the demographics of the U.S. population. We're going to look at all sorts of different breakdowns of characteristics of the population so we can get a better idea of who it is that makes up the American public. Our learning objective today, we want to describe the demographics of the United States. Pretty basic. We're just going to break down a bunch of different categories and look at the kind of current status of the United States population. This way, we will be able to better explain the ways that the public impacts policymaking. We're going to have to know different groups in the public and how many people there are and where these population pressures are and where people live and all this kind of stuff so that we can figure out exactly what it is that politicians have to think about when they're dealing with the population. And so today, hopefully, we'll be able to answer the question, who makes up the American public? So first thing today, we are going to talk about the population demographics. We're just going to look at the facts about what the population of the United States is today, like what different groups make up the population, break down a bunch of different data. So back behind all this data here, you can see one of our devoted census workers doing the important work of counting the United States population so that we can have this information. All right, first, let's make sure we are all on the same page about demographics. When we use that word, we're really just talking about the study of population. We're trying to use different categories or characteristics so we can describe who makes up the population. We can categorize people and compare them in different places or different amounts and things like that. What we want to do in government, why we want this information, is we're mostly going to track political participation, particularly in voting. This is a thing that politicians regularly do, is they make generalizations about these groups, and they use that to predict participation patterns and particularly to predict voting. And so we'll get into which groups vote and which way they lean and all that stuff in the future. But for today, we just want to get an idea of where and who makes up the U.S. population. So what typically political scientists or public officials will do is we'll use historical trends from these demographic groups, and we'll expect those to be reasonable predictors of the way these groups will behave in the future. So historically, the youngest groups of voters don't really vote at high percentages. And so candidates typically expect that to continue. And so they might not waste all of their time campaigning to 18 to 22-year-olds if that's not a group that's going to show up and vote a lot. Now, obviously, with each of these groups, and especially when we get into the voting and the ideologies in a little while, each of these groups is made up of individuals and made up of people that make their own choices and don't fit all these patterns and things like that. But what a government official is trying to do is they're trying to do what's most efficient. So they're using these predictions to make assumptions about future participation. All right, let's just start with the population, the whole entire population. So the total population of the United States, we did the census in 2020, and that data is not out yet, but we are expecting that data to say that the population of the United States is 330 million people. And so what we see on the map there, the darker the color of the state, the more people live in that state. And so just to give us an idea of our biggest states and our largest states, a few of those are labeled here. So our biggest state is California. They've got almost 40 million people living in the state. In Texas would be our second biggest state, and they are at 29 million people. So a tremendous amount of people living in Texas as well. Our third biggest state, this will officially happen at the 2020 census. Our third biggest state has been New York, but our third biggest state now is Florida with 22 million people. So three very, very big states there. For reference, Tennessee there is 6.9 million. So it is one of the larger states, but definitely only, about a third of the size of Florida. We've also got our smallest states on here. So Wyoming is the smallest state that we have with 582,000 people. Vermont, another very, very, very small state with 620,000 people. And just for reference, the population of the city of Memphis, this does not include one single person that lives in the suburbs. The population of Memphis is 655,000. So the city of Memphis has more people in it than Wyoming or Vermont or a couple of these other smaller states as well. So the growth in the population across the country is definitely uneven, but we have seen growth just about everywhere. The map on the left shows us population growth from all the way back from 1950, and the only state that's actually lost population is West Virginia. But every other state on there has grown. The yellow states have grown a little bit. And the blue states have at least doubled in size, and the green states have grown at the fastest rate. And so we've got a lot of population growth, but like you guys read about, though, a lot of the population growth is occurring out in the Southwest and on the west side of the country. A little like more detailed breakdown, which we'll take a look at later, we see the growth rate in states over the last decade, and we have a couple places, particularly like the Midwest is growing very, very slowly, and states out in the West, like looks like Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, those states are growing very quickly. Texas growing the fastest of any state. And so we've got a lot of population growth to the south and to the southwest. Cities are an important part of our population because 82% of all Americans live in an urban area. And this means that the population is pretty dense. So we're talking about 1,600 people per square mile, which is kind of hard to imagine. But very big cities with 1 million people, have more than 7,000 people in every square mile. So cities are very, densely populated areas with large amounts of population. And just to give us a reference here, the map in the back is showing us all cities based only on their city population. And so you can see some numbers there if you want. Those are the cities in order of New York being the largest, going down to DC. But we really want to think about cities in terms of what we call metropolitan areas. So the metro area of a city is the population of the city and its surrounding suburbs. So on the last slide, we talked about how Memphis is 650,000 people, but Memphis's metropolitan area is 1.3 million people. And Memphis's metropolitan area would count Memphis, all of the suburbs here in Tennessee, the Germantown, Collierville, Cordova, Bartlett kind of stuff, as well as DeSoto County and West Memphis, since those are basically just suburbs of Memphis as well. All those people work in Memphis and things like that. So Memphis has a 1.3 million person metro area, but our biggest cities would be New York with 20 million people, LA with 13 million people, Chicago with 10 million people, Dallas, Fort Worth. We put those two together because they're two cities that started out to be about an hour's drive apart, but they have just grown closer and closer to each other, where it's really just one big metropolitan area. We've got Houston and DC as well. All right, let's start to break the population down by category, and we're going to start with race. Now, these categories here, these are the categories used by the census. And so, according to the U.S. Census, they would categorize one group as white, which means these people have origins in any of the original people of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. And so that means that for these purposes, people of Hispanic ancestry, people of Arab ancestry are counting as white, and that group altogether makes up 74% of the population. Black or African American is a racial category in the census, and that deals with any person having origins of any of the black racial groups of Africa. So they're isolating some parts of Africa from the northern parts of Africa and all that, but that makes up 13% of the population. Asians, representing 6% of the population, anybody having any origin in the original people of the Far East, Indian subcontinent, or Southeast Asia. And those are our big groups. Very small groups, we have American Indian, which would be people having origins of the original people of North and South America, including Alaskan natives, not including Hawaiian natives, because they're the next group down, the Pacific Islanders, making up a small percent of the population. These would be people having origins in Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific islands. And then finally, more than one race, that makes up 3% of the population. So we can see if you look at the chart up at the top, or even the pie chart in the middle, typically we count white people and Hispanics as different groups, and we see that in both of these charts here. But what's important about that chart in the top right is the top bar is showing us a racial breakdown of the United States by total population, and the bottom bar is showing us a total breakdown of just the children. And so the breakdown is very, very different there. And we see how there will be different trends in growth of these racial groups over the next few years. Little bit of racial geography here. The big map is showing us places that are considered diverse. So this is where the population is pretty mixed, and we see that that's definitely true in the southeast, in the southwest, and on the west coast. And those places that are bluer and less diverse, those places tend to be the Northeast and Midwest. And in the Northeast and Midwest, those places are mostly white people. But you'll also see some bluer spots down in parts of southern Texas, where those are mostly Hispanic populations. The smaller purple map on the right shows us where the population is over 50% white. So that's a county by county breakdown of which counties are more than 50% white, and we can see where the populations are a little more diverse. All right, so we want to explore a little bit of racial geography in the United States. So, kind of taking a deeper exploration at one of those maps we looked at just a minute ago. So these are the states that have the largest percentages of white citizens, black citizens, Asian citizens. So a lot of the Northeast, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, these places are overwhelmingly white. We could see that on the map. You can see it a little bit tiny up in the corner. They're very non-diverse places. Our region with the largest African American population would be down in the southeast. So Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, these are the states with the highest percentage of black population. So this has huge political implications if we get into the voting patterns of black voters, and makes these states much more competitive states than we might otherwise assume if we get all of the voters to participate. And this is kind of what we saw with Georgia in the 2020 election being such a surprise win for Democrats. And then for states with the highest percent Asian population, those are Hawaii, California. The other West Coast states are out there as well. And then New Jersey may seem a little surprising, but New Jersey is really just a suburb of New York. And so New Jersey has a very large percentage of Asian population as well. And so these are important things that we track, because once we get into the historical voting patterns of these groups, it makes geography come into play a little bit with politics and predictions. So Hispanic Americans are on the census. They're just counted as white people, but that is not really how we deal with them in politics. They are kind of a separate group with separate voting behaviors and things like that. And they are the fastest growing demographic group, the largest minority group in the United States. So they're already the second biggest ethnic racial minority, or the second biggest group behind white people. And they are the fastest growing. And they're already at almost 20% of the population. So this is a really big deal for political figures to think about, right? This is why up until 2016, both parties were really focusing their efforts on trying to win the loyalty of Hispanic voters, because there are so many Hispanic voters, and it looks like you will absolutely need the support of Hispanic voters in the future. So just to get kind of the same feel for where we find Hispanic voters, we see that they make up a little bit more than half of the population of New Mexico, and they are making up almost 40% of the population of California and Texas. And so Those, of course, are our two biggest states with the two biggest numbers of electoral votes. So it becomes very, very important for political reasons there. All right, religion is really important in the United States because most citizens claim a religious affiliation. When we take a look at the breakdown here, we're going to look at some of the different trends in just a second, but we see that Protestants make up a little more than a third, Catholics make up almost a quarter, and other Christians making up 14%. So combined, that is almost three-fourths of the country. It's 72% claiming a version of Christianity as their religion. Minority religions in the country make up about 6%, and the fastest growing group of people in the United States is the non-religious. And so that is almost a quarter of the population so far. Here's just a couple of ways where that has changed over time. And we see the same chart there on the far right, but we see how it's changed since 2003. Since 2003, the number of Protestants, it does not mean that people are abandoning religion. It means that religious groups are not growing as quickly as other groups. So all populations here are growing from 2003 to 2017, but non-religious is growing a lot faster. Other religions are growing faster as well. Catholics have held pretty steady, but the percentage of Protestants in the country is shrinking a little bit, and this has big political implications as well. We can see in the chart over on the left, this just kind of shows it for over a much longer period of time, and the Protestants there in the baby blue, you can see that they have shrunk as a percent of the population going back to the 50s. We got a couple breakdowns here about the languages spoken in the United States. Basically the same chart here, just one in like a pie chart form and another one where we can see a little of the groups a little better off there in the like square version. But English is the predominant language in the country, but there is no official language in the United States. Like that's not anywhere in any law or anything like that. So we do have a multilingual society. We have a variety of languages from all over the world, although predominantly English is used in all media and business and education and all this kind of stuff. So we've got an overwhelming majority of English speakers. All right, when we break the population down by age, here's an old population pyramid. And you can't really see a lot of the numbers there enough, but just to give us an idea, we have about 20% of the population that is 14 and under. Our biggest chunk of the population is in between the range of 24 to 54, but the population over 65 and the population over 55 has been growing because people are living a long time. And so the average age of Americans at this point is almost 38 years old. And the growing number of old people is going to be important for political implications in the future. We're going to really get into this when we get into economic policy, but an income breakdown of the United States shows us just a little bit. We can split everybody into like a bottom 20%, a top 25%, and all that. The bottom 10% of Americans are making less than $1,000 a month. So like 1 out of 10 people living in the country has less than $1,000 a month income. The bottom quarter of the country is earning about $22,000 a year. The middle third, like this is our big chunk here, the middle third has an income somewhere between $30,000 and $62,000. So that is kind of the closer to the medium, middle amount of money that Americans are making. And then the top quarter of Americans is making over $75,000. So the top 5%, is over 167, and the top 1% of Americans are earning over $250,000. Now let's look at those numbers on the left. So the average household income is $81,000 a year, which sounds like, wow, that's crazy. That's a really good amount of money. But the median income And you guys know your math. You know how the median is different. We're taking the actual middle income. If we lined all of the incomes up in America, the median income is way lower. And what that tells us is that the average is skewed a great deal by really, really huge incomes in that top 1%. So even though, it's a small percentage of the population, but people that are making, way more than $250,000 a year, we have people that are making, millions of dollars a year in income. And so that really skews our average a great deal. So we've got, wide wealth discrepancies between the, bottom quarter, bottom half of Americans and those at the top. All right, and when we think about education, I think some of these numbers might surprise you a little bit. We've got 32% of the country, so a third of the country only has a high school diploma. Almost 10% of the country doesn't even finish high school, and so the percentage of the population that is what we would call educated by political standards is pretty low. Only 20% of the country has a bachelor's degree, and only 10% of the country has a degree beyond that. And so when we talk about like college educated voters, even though those are the voters that get a lot of attention and a lot of focus from politicians, they're not necessarily the biggest part of the voting pool. And while we're here, I want you guys to enjoy that wonderful high school graduate over there on the left. All right, so that's it for our demographic breakdown of what the United States looks like right now. This is important because we're just trying to figure out, like, where the people are, what kind of people are all over the place, education ranges and age ranges and income and religion, all that kind of stuff, because we're going to use that information to predict political participation in the next few days here. The next thing we're going to do, though, is we want to take a minute and look at some of the trends in these demographic statistics.